The primary purpose of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. They are not necessarily the views of Special School District of St. Louis County. Hey everybody, welcome back to Innovative AAC Solutions. We are here. We have made it through most of the season, Bridget. It's gone pretty fast, don't you think?
Yeah, we're just in the home stretch here, ready for spring break.
So speaking of the home stretch, I think that it might benefit us to chat a little bit about what stretching ourselves looks like in that when we are working with really anybody with an AAC device, but specifically Gestalt language processors, I think there's this idea of like we wish we had just a list of gestalts or kind of like a cookbook approach of how we're supposed to, we're type A people in general, most of us, and we like to have things in order. We want to make sure we're doing all of the things. Um, but I don't know if you've experienced this where someone wants the cookbook and it's really hard because it's more than just these are the steps you need to take and this is what's going to help, particularly in early Gestalt language, someone who's in early Gestalt language development.
Yeah, and it's tricky because, we talk about a team approach, but what can a therapist specifically do to help in the session itself to help advance this kid and move them through stages and support them?
Yeah, and there's good strategies and implementation strategies, just like for analytic language processors. We want to be modeling and giving aided language input. We want to have phrases for efficiency. We want self-advocacy. We want all of these things. But I really think such a crucial part of this is the dynamic assessment piece of looking at the individual in front of you, looking at their strengths and how those strengths would then apply to features on the system that they have. And, you don't have to know all the features in a system. We have facilitators to help with that. But if I have someone who's really not responding to the voice on a device, I might look at doing an audio recording and seeing if those original audio sources are more beneficial for that individual. And, likewise, if they are looking at the keyboard and using the keyboard to script preferred movie lines or whatever that might look like, we really want to lean into that and we want to look at it with a critical eye. Do you have any individuals or users that you can think of that that would apply to?
Yeah, I did have a student who she loved Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and the synthesized digital speech was not enough. And my voice actually was enough. So I didn't have to lean all the way into, um, digitally recording the actual media source, but my voice was the thing that, mom one time told me that she was bringing that voice into her room and just like it was my voice that she was listening to the clips go over and over, and she was getting a lot of joy from that. So, like you said, leaning into what supports these students need and kind of trying to make their system feel authentic to them and help them have the gestalts that they need. But it isn't cookie cutter. It isn't, a prescriptive one-way path.
And I know we dove into it a little bit with Jen Kronk and her son and how they set up his system, but I thought we could dive into it a little bit more from an AAC user themselves. So I had the chance to sit down with Courtney, who, if you follow her, you may know her otherwise as Just Keep Stimming. She is an amazing advocate. She's an amazing person, and she gives some amazing insight here into what it can really look like for someone who is an AAC user and also identifies as a Gestalt language processor, what those individual considerations might be. So let's dive into that interview with Courtney. Welcome back to Innovative AAC Solutions. We are back for another episode and an entire season on the topic of Gestalt language processing and AAC. I am so excited to introduce my guest. You may have seen and heard her before. She has spoken many a times on different topics related to AAC, but the lovely Courtney Johnson is here with us today. Hi, Courtney. So, if someone is not familiar with you yet, first of all, they're probably living under a rock because you have been around now and are so wonderful and are so eloquent at speaking to AAC. But let's say someone is not familiar with you. Tell our listeners a little bit about your journey, your path with AAC, how it's looked like through the years, and kind of what systems maybe you've used and what you're using now.
Thank you so much having me here. It's so good to see you. To introduce myself, I am an autistic adult with multiple disabilities, including traumatic brain injury. I use this device to communicate due to a mixture of autism and aphasia. I currently serve on my state's Council on Developmental Disabilities and do a little advocacy work online. My personal experiences with AAC are varied. I grew up speaking, but my speech was often heavily scripted or unreliable to what I actually wanted to say. I even used to carry a journal that I affectionately referred to as my quote book, that I would use to communicate or script from. As someone who is hard of hearing, and with having a non-speaking little brother, I was able to use some American Sign Language to communicate with him and others. I also preferred using drawing erase boards, typing, and drawing. I was finally introduced to speech-generating devices in college, as my speech therapist and occupational therapist felt it would help me communicate more effectively. A surprise consequence of that was that I ended up having less meltdowns and was able to handle more sensory input. These days, I use AAC generally full-time due to aphasia from traumatic brain injuries.
And then what is the name of the system that you're using currently or systems? I know sometimes we use multiple.
The system I'm using right now is Proloquo for text, as it's excellent for structuring these kinds of things. My device itself is the Tobii Dynavox speech case. I do also sometimes use the programs Tobii Dynavox, Snap and Proloquo to go, depending on the context and support needs during that time.
I love that. And I think that that's so important for us to think about because it's not always going to, as so many AAC adult users tell us, it's not one thing is not going to fit all needs. And just like all communication, we have to use different communication methods in different contexts. And this is no different. I also love that you mentioned that surprise your behaviors and you had more sensory capacity when you were able to use AAC. And I love that A for you and B just as an example for so many others when we think about it's not just going to impact our language, it's going to impact really our entire world, right?
I mean, there's no way I could have graduated college without my device, and definitely not magna cum laude.
Right. Right. And that, I mean, an achievement for anyone is to graduate with honor. So congrats on that because I'm trying to remember, I'm not going to age myself and I can't remember where I landed on that at all, but The other thing I wanted to touch on, you had mentioned how you had a notebook that you wrote scripts in. So this whole season, we are talking about Gestalt language processing. Can you describe how you would describe Gestalt language processing and if you identify as a GLP or a Gestalt language processor?
For me, I think the concept of Gestalt language processing comes down to emphasizing the value of delayed echolalia and scripting. I know there's so many other things that go into it, but I think that's the biggest part of it all. It gives more credence to an important part of our communication styles. A lot of people think that scripting or echolalia aren't meaningful forms of communication, but it honestly can help us communicate more. I know I'm definitely a Gestalt language processor.
So you mentioned, I kind of want to tie a couple things you said together because you identify as a GLP. You are absolutely right in the sense that we know that it is meaningful. At one point, we thought that it it wasn't, right? Some people still think that we need to extinguish or stop scripting. If you take nothing else away, please know that echolalia, delayed echolalia, it's meaningful. And so we talked though, Courtney, about your systems. You have multiple systems that you use in different contexts. You have some amazing reviews. If anyone follows you on Instagram, you have some amazing reviews of all the different systems, ones that you don't even use currently. But so I would encourage anyone to follow Courtney if you don't already. It's just keep stimming. But what in your systems or other systems do you think you have found helpful or would be helpful for a GLP specifically, or maybe just in general? What are the most helpful things you think of for systems?
In all of the systems I've tried, I always like to add phrases, scripts, and stalls. Some systems actually have specific pages for phrases. Proloquo for text is the first one that comes to mind, although the quick-fire pages on Toby Dynavox Snap are also an excellent spot for it. Systems that allow for uploading audio or sound clips are particularly great. I can't speak for everyone, but the specific tone of voices and gestalts is a huge role in getting my point across. Just the phrases alone isn't always enough. When I'm with friends who are also autistic, we often communicate with scripts and jokes. And I like having those on my device, because it's a way of bonding.
Ooh, I love the part where you said just having the phrases isn't always enough because I think it's such a big misnomer is that when we're talking about GLP and AAC, we're just talking about phrase-based pages or phrases in themselves. And I don't want to assume that you're going to agree with me. So feel free to argue the point. But thinking through so much of it is about intonation. So much of it is about the tone of voice and the prosody of the voice. And so it can be so impactful when we look at whether that be the intonation of the system voice or whether that be recorded speech or audio, right? Yeah.
A big part of it is absolutely intonation. A lot of scripts have specific emotional meanings tied to when I first heard them or help add to my emotions in the context.
Yeah. So do you feel like, and we kind of hit on such big pieces of it, but Are there other accommodations within an AAC system that we should consider for GLP AAC users?
Audio clips are definitely particularly great for intonation, and finding a voice on the device that they prefer is especially important. Some voices have the ability to change intonation for some things, but that sometimes takes a lot of work to figure out. Again, adding scripts to the system is a huge part of it. Of course, that doesn't mean changing the whole layout. If you do that, it will interrupt our motor planning. I think a lot of people forget that.
Yep, it's so huge. And again, we're not misnomers. We're not asking to change the layout when we look at someone who's in those early stages of Gestalt language development. We're not asking you to delete it, to start over. Like none of that is happening. We still need access to robust language and words. It's just we're asking you to make some accommodations. So I think that's such a good point. And then it also brings me back, that motor automaticity brings me back to something that is kind of a recurring theme that I want to make sure we touch on, which is what you mentioned earlier about how you were sometimes saying scripts and things with spoken words that you didn't necessarily mean as part of your autonomous language and your autonomous thought. So I would say that might be something that others see as like a threat to what someone who uses AAC or someone who is a GLP is experiencing within their communication style. Do you agree? And also, are there any other risks or challenges or threats that you see for someone who's a GLP AAC user that we need to just be kind of aware of?
For me, one of the things I especially did growing up was forming gestalts from my peers and media I saw. I spent more time around adults because I grew up a ward of the state and lived with older family members. Because of that, my vocabulary was advanced but also not quite what I wanted to say. My brain would kind of just automatically load the phrases and repeat them, because I couldn't find the words for exactly what I wanted to say. This wasn't always a good thing, especially if someone told me what to say. And in abusive situations with that child and adult power imbalance, that's very dangerous. As an AAC user, the lack of intonation and ability to really convey things can be very stressful. Another aspect is that phrases and gestalts will essentially repeat over and over in my head, not always voluntarily. In college, I had a roommate introduce me to the old video clip platform called Vine. I'm old enough to remember it, of course, but I was always kind of out of the loop with popular culture things. But that became a major way of communication with my roommate, especially because they understood the intonation. Sound clips were important, especially post-brain injuries. Before my more major abyss in college, for example, one of my scripts was from that older television show called Lost in Space.
Ha!
I used the phrase danger, Will Robinson danger, whenever I was getting overstimulated in public. My friends could tell how stressed I was by how fast or emotional I would repeat it. That intonation was important to discern the meaning. But specifically for AAC users, I think the biggest challenge is that not every AAC app is built around the concept of Gestalt language processing. They're usually designed for analytic, with one word at a time, sometimes with built-in phrases, sometimes not. Meanwhile, some people program devices only with phrases, but phrases that the adult prefers them to use, not their own. There has to be a balance of both robust language access and the option of gestalts, and with the AAC user's preference at the forefront. If the device isn't for them and used for just instructions or demand, they're not going to want to use it.
And it doesn't resonate with them. The thing that I just my aha in that amazing response and your thought process there and taking us through what you experienced is that even the phrase, even the gestalt or the script, Danger Will Robinson on your device, there's one cadence to it. There's it's not flexible. So now that we're in a world of AI, AAC device companies need to listen up because maybe instead of having one setting in the voice, we need to prioritize that so that I can say Danger Will Robinson and I can change it even within that phrase itself, right? Maybe that needs to be something that we think of as a feature in the future, especially with AI and like how we want to emphasize it. We've started talking about vocal smileys, but maybe it needs to go beyond that. Maybe like there are things that we could start to. I'm going to put you on the think tank, Courtney. I'm just going to like throw it out there. You're so busy and I know you don't have time for that right now, but like these are the things that I think that we need to be looking forward and proactively thinking about for how we can accommodate some of those GLP priorities when we go forward on a device. So thank you for sharing that insight because I think, and like the dichotomy of adults and AAC users and learning language and how we set up systems, like all of that is so important. And you're such a good advocate and I know I keep singing your praises, but I truly mean it. Is there anybody else that you would say would be someone good to follow or other good learning opportunities on this topic?
Oh, I don't even know where to start. I know my experiences are mentioned in one of Meaningful Speeches modules for the AAC and GLP course, and there's a lot of great resources in it. I believe Tiffany from Functioning Autism was also in it as well. For non-speakers, there are so many people out there that it's hard to think of usernames at the top of my head, and especially if we're talking specifically about gestalt processors.
And that's okay. We can always put some we have plenty that will be available on the website and we can put some in the show notes if something comes to your head. We could talk about this all day and I love talking to you. We still haven't connected in person one day, I'm hoping. But before we end our time today, I always ask anyone that comes on the podcast, what's your favorite AAC moment to date? Or maybe a teaser. I'll asterisk this. Is there something that's coming up that you're excited that we can highlight?
I can't particularly think of anything coming up, but I'm also running on not enough sleep. I know there's a couple of advocacy things planned here locally, not necessarily online. If we had done this last month, I probably would have been more interesting with the DC trip we did.
But I mean, you're invited to speaking arrangements quite frequently. It's just a matter of if you can kind of fit it in your schedule. And I just know I'm so excited. It's been such a pleasure having you on here today. And I think that I just hope we can continue to connect because you are amazing and wonderful. And I'm just so glad that you could give us your insight on this because other people are going to relate to it. It is important. You need this, you need to be put on a platform and have this voice. Like it's so critical to helping people understand this. It's been around a long time. It's not a diagnosis, it's not something new, but it's something that we've kind of gotten lost in the shadows of how people process and communicate. Anything else you would add or any leaving impressions, or we just leave it on that note and say thanks to Courtney for coming on today? I mean, I think we could land it there. What do you think? Land the plane there? Okay, let's do that. And on behalf of Innovative AAC Solutions, I will go ahead. We will have Courtney's info in the show notes, and make sure to give her a follow on Just Keep Stimming. If you're listening to this audio, we both have our awesome shirts on. I have my Presume Competence shirt on, and Courtney has her Non-Compliance is a Social Skill shirt on. Where is yours? Yours isn't from Play Spark, is it? You got it like an Etsy or something? I just know someone's going to ask.
It was a fundraiser thing on that website Bonfire. It goes on sale from time to time, I think. It's been several years now that I've hit it. I do have some of the Place Park shirts as well, but they're in the laundry.
I just purchased 2 more from the sale last night too. Yeah. It's hard not to. Okay. Now that we've talked shopping, now that we've talked GLP, check out the notes, check out Courtney. Anytime you get a chance to hear her speak, she's wonderful. And we'll just say adieu till next time for Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm Laura Hayes, and we just want to thank Courtney for being on again. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Hi again, it's Bridget here. I'm going to show you an activity called Nutrition Lotto, and it is kind of like a bingo game where you could either have it like this or blank, but the really fun part is it has a bunch of food manipulatives. So my thought for the Gestalt language processing piece of it activity would be, instead of playing it like bingo per se, just to kind of have it like a, open-ended, fun, free game where either you're pretending to eat or feeding baby dolls or puppets. But for those stage 1 gestalts, saying like, let's find the food, and then, naming the specific food. Where's the onion? I found some. Let's eat. We can find it. Yummy pie. I see the orange. The lettuce is here. And then for stage 2, you'd be naming more of it. So it's rice. Let's eat the pretzel. Where's the corn? Look, it's cheese. Pineapple's so yummy. That's not broccoli. And then stage 3, again, it's just that referential. I'm breaking down those descriptors plus the nouns. So like small orange, red watermelon, yummy cookie, little yogurt. I hope that you and your students would have a lot of fun playing with this Nutrition Lotto. It's in the IRC. Feel free to check it out and let us know what you think.